Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, welcome to all of our new and regular attendees. If you haven't attended these before, my name is Michael Trumper. I'm the regular presenter here at Intaver Institute. I am one of the principals here at Intaver Institute and have been in the area of project and risk management and software development for the past 20 years. Intaver Institute was founded in 2002 and released the first version of RiskyProject in 2004, which is the software we're looking at today. We have and still continue to develop the software to keep up with the latest developments in project risk analysis and management. The software I will be using today is version 6.1, which was released in the middle of 2015. We do have an upcoming new version that we will be putting out an announcement when that's ready to go. It's in beta at this current time. As for the webinar, generally the webinars are going to be fairly informal presentations on popular topics or features that our users have asked us about. Today's webinar is an introduction to project risk management, risk registers, and more. During the webinar, I will discuss the main components of a risk register and then go through how you can set this up in RiskyProject, and then finally about how we can generate reports out of this risk register. Before we start, I would like to just go over some, they call it housekeeping, but it's basically how you can interact during the webinar. So if you're not familiar with GoToWebinar, up at the top right-hand corner, you should see a pane, and it will allow you to choose the audio and mic, depending on how you want to interact. I always recommend using, if you have a computer set up with a mic and a speakers, that tends to be a bit, the quality is better. There is also the telephone. You can phone in on that. But again, if you have a mic and speakers, I always recommend that. You should see a questions panel over below that. During the webinar, if you have issues or questions, please submit them via the questions. We will be monitoring the questions as they come in. If there are technical issues, you can't hear me, the screen isn't clear, or things like that, we'll try and address it during the webinar. However, if they're just questions pertaining the content of the webinar, we're going to have a Q&A after the fact, so we'll look at those, and if there are some questions, we will answer them after the fact. As we said, we always post the webinar, the recording. It will be up on our site under the webinars, recordings of past webinars. And that should be up fairly shortly. So I've got it as an agenda. So as I said, what are we going to talk about today? What are the components of the risk management system? These are what I consider the main ones that underlie where the data goes and how it's presented. The risk categories, risk properties, and the risk matrix. And that talks about probability and impact matrices. We can talk about modifying your views, so how you can customize some of the views, which helps on some of the reporting. Risk reviews, how do you enter them into the risk register, risk history, and finally the risk reports, or the reports that we can get out of the risk register. So when we look at the components of the risk register, RiskyProject, we have a integrated risk register that comes with the software. It has three major components that can be customized. Obviously, there's an out-of-the-box setup, but that can all be managed and changed according to your organization's needs. And as far as I'm concerned, it should be as much as required and as little as possible. So if there are pieces in the risk register or data or properties or mostly categories that you're not going to be using, we want to be able to either delete them from the standard out of the box, or we can actually add them to the system. So we want to be able to go through and set this up so it meets your organization's needs. The one thing is for properties, we're looking at finding out what the essential data is. Now, there are some hard-coded properties that are in the system because they're part of our what we call our risk properties view. But the ones that, other than the ones that are hard-coded, and some of them are hard-coded because of the Monte Carlo simulation, a lot of the other ones can be deleted from the system, or you can modify them, or you can add them. And properties can have different data properties. You know, they can be a string, they could be a risk, they could be a resource type of data, they could be a date. So you want to be able to go in and set that up so that, and really it's about the data, the metadata that surrounds that risk that you want to capture and be able to port who, what, when, where, and how. The probability and impact matrix. Now, out of the box, again, we do have a risk matrix, but behind that risk matrix, there is a combination of probability and impact. Now, if you're doing qualitative risk analysis, a lot of times what's in the system right off the bat will be sufficient. However, if you're doing quantitative, you may want to change the ranges that each cell or column or row represent in terms of probability and impact. And a lot of times when you set this up, it really goes to show how the risks are scored. So the score will be the same, but if you want something to be land in the red, as part of a risk reporting, so everything that's in the red, we're going to have a risk plan about everything. We call that maybe a critical or serious. Sometimes you may need to modify that, and you may need to modify the out-of-the-box 5x5. Perhaps you only have a 3x3 risk matrix, or we see many different combinations, 4x5, etc. So we can modify that to meet any particular specific requirements of your risk management system. The other part of this is then we'll look at customizing the risk register. So a lot of times I'll be talking to users and they'll look at the risk register and they don't understand that actually all of the columns can be modified. So you do have this out of the box, which shows a pre and post mitigation if you're using that. But if there's data in the risk register that you would rather see, or you don't really care about what the risk assignment is, or whether it's open or closed, which a lot of these will have out of the box, you can modify that and switch around the columns, and then actually the risk register itself can be used as a printout. Risk reviews, part of the risk register is doing regular risk reviews of the risks, so status updates, and that can all be tracked in the risk register, and it's particularly useful not just as an exercise on the monitoring and control, but also for the lessons learned, so that when you look back and at your project risks over time, especially if you want to be able to use what you've learned in one project and apply it to another, you'll know whether the risk burn down activities or mitigations, the strategies that you had worked. Were you able to manage the risk in the way that you thought you were? All of that should be captured in here, and you should be able to pull that out. And in conjunction with that, you'll be able to have the risk history. Now, risk history will capture all of the changes to the risk over the life cycle of the project. Okay, and so there should be almost a one-to-one relationship between the risk reviews and the risk history. And you should be able then, in the risk history, track what changes happened, when they did, and obviously why they occurred. And finally, there are some various reports that you can get out of there. We'll look at setting up the risk report. There's a standard risk report, which gives you, excuse me, all of the data per risk out of the risk register. If you want to have an overall view of all the risks in the system, you can either do it by risk using the risk report, or else you can set up your risk register or the risk matrix. There's some reporting that comes out of that to be able to pull that data out and create some reports out of it. So with that, we'll go directly into the software. So what we're looking at here is the standard risk register, all the components that come with it. And this is the out-of-the-box system. And if you go up and you look at the risks on the tab and you come across here, you can see the settings. So this is actually where you can set up your risk register, the components behind it that we talked about, properties, I might have failed to mention categories, and the risk matrix. First thing I like to do is when we go in is to go into the risk categories. Risk categories, these, if you look here, you can see that these ones are grayed out, and these are part of the hard-coded Monte Carlo. So if you're running it runs the underlying calculation engine that we have in the system. It's obviously Monte Carlo, and these cannot be removed. So this is actually a category, and if you think of it, these are the outcomes, the impacts that could happen. And you can select, when you're doing a risk assessment, you can select that for schedule or for cost. And we also have income in there, and it can tell you about what are the differences that can occur. This one right here is an impact that would occur to your resources. It's a rate increase. So if you have a resource and you have a cost associated with that resource, could be hourly, it could be a fixed cost of material, or it could be a cost type risk. However, so all of these are hard-coded. The rest of these here, I scrolled down a bit quickly, are all, they come out of the box. This is a category, and this is an impact type. These can all be modified or deleted. So if you're running a simulation, or if you're running doing some risk management, and you are looking at other categories other than just cost and risk, what you want to do is make sure you're capturing those, but you want to make sure that you're not having any extra in your system, because then they just tend to clog it up a bit. Because then whenever you're like doing an assessment, you want to select a category instead of having the 4 categories that you want: cost, schedule, let's say maybe safety and environment or quality. You have all 7 of these. So it's very simple just to go in and delete those to clean that up. So if we're going to start, we could just get rid of all of these. Now the other side of that is that it may be that you don't really want this, and you're not tracking environment, but maybe there is, we'll call this, you might have a reputation risk that you're. So we can add these to the system as well, simply by doing these. And now one of the artifacts of the system is that we actually have a risk category, and per category we have impacts. And there is a 1 to n relationship. You can actually, if you wanted to, I could add different impacts on here under reputation if we wanted to go down that path. The other side of that is you can see that we do have this risk weighting. We can see, we call it importance here. What that just means is these have when we run our risk scores, our calculations, all of these are weighted the same. I'm not going to go too much into this, but we have what's called a pairwise analytical hierarchy process, but we can put in some risk weighting on various categories. For instance, if we think safety is more important than cost or schedule, we can increase the importance of safety versus schedule simply by, let's say we think it's 3 times more important. We can see that we can boost this up, and we see that schedule has taken the importance of it, and these values are used in the overall calculation. So if you have categories that you want to boost up in terms of visibility, how they're prioritized in the system, this is another way that we can do that. We'll just reset that back down to 1 to 1. So we can set up the categories. So now when we look in the system, there's only going to be 4 categories that we have. The other thing that we want to set up is the properties. Again, one of the things in the system is that we can see a lot of these are grayed out, and they correspond with the risk properties view, which is here. And this is a hard-coded view that we have. And also we have in the custom I'll go back to that. There's some hard-coded ones. The risk properties view was based on a specification that was developed down in, I believe, with the DoD and the U.S. Department of Defense in 2007 or 2008. Anyways, we've got some hard-coded, but if we want to, we can add additional properties. Again, these grayed out ones are hard-coded, but if we don't want to have a property in there, so we want to simplify it, we can quickly just go through and delete the ones that we don't think are required. And there is quite a big set here. But we can also create a new property as well. So I'm just going to call this new property, but it will be. And as you can see, we can give it a name. And it can have various property types. So it can be a string, which is just a alphanumeric, an integer, real number, a resource. So if you have resources in your system, you can with people, you can select that as the resource on that risk. Date, a risk, so it could be another risk in the system. It could be a cost. So you can set that up. So if we had it as a string, we can just leave it as that. And that becomes a new property in the system. So we can either modify them, delete them, or add, depending on what sort of data you're looking to capture in the system. I've left this format risk matrix up to last because I think it's, from my standpoint, it can be one of the key aspects of setting up the system, because it's talking about the assessment, probability, and impact. Now, by default, we have a 5x5, and we have this. If we want to change the level of red versus yellow versus green, we can pull that over. We call it the risk tolerance. That's it. But it may be that you want to have let's say a 5x4. We only have, if we only had 4 probabilities, you can see that here we can actually set this up. So we now have a 4x4, but 4x5. But one of the things you can see here is now we've got these red, because one of the things is that the probability has to add up to 100. So to bring that back into, yeah, there it goes. To bring that up to, so it's 100%, we just have to go in and set this up. And this is a one-time thing, because once we set this up as a default, we can set this as default here. It will always, it will set it up so all of your new projects have these settings. One of the things to think about is when you enter in the data, specifically if you're doing it qualitatively, what it does is it tries to put these in it uses the mid-range of these ranges to plant the risk right there. If we're doing it quantitatively, it becomes a bit more complex, and it can be a lot of times when you start to get into probability. I'm just going to restore the defaults on this. A lot of times a probability, if we go to duration, you could have, you can start to put in labels. What does a low impact mean on, let's say, on schedule? We can put these, we can edit these. So if we want to have these as showing as part of the system, we can add that. What these do is when we have, if we're doing especially on a qualitative, these labels will appear and allow to tell the user what do we mean by negligible, what do we mean by critical. Again, you may have to change these by project on the desktop version, but we can set this up so we understand what these mean. On the same thing here, but this could be that probability, maybe probability for very low is 1 in, let's say, 100. So that's just minusculely low. So if we're doing it qualitatively, it doesn't make much difference. But if we want it quantitatively, what happens? It calculates based on percentage scores. So 1% actually means 1% there. And so what happens as we build this up, what this does is it weights. It gives us a risk matrix that's actually weighted. So it has more it's a more relative scales on these. And if you're using the risk matrix to as part of your reporting and your assessment using quantitative risk analysis, so you're doing Monte Carlo and you're using cost and schedule data, I really recommend that you adjust this. And we do have some videos on the scene on our on YouTube and on our site that show some of the process. But we want to bring the relative scale of these in line. It still has to become 100%. But if I had 1 in 10. 10, I would bring this as, so that takes up the next up to 10% of that probability. So we're starting to scale this up. And so if we said now this is 1 in 4, so that's 25%. So I'm going to say that's the next 15%. And then we could say less than 1 in 2. So that is the next 25%. And this, oh, okay. And here we could say greater than, oh, I got these. There we go, sorry. And we'll say less than 1, greater than 1 in 2. So that's over 50%. And we are going to put that up. And so, this will be quicker to do it this way. So when we set this up, you can see now that it is green because it adds up to 100. But what we've done is we've created a scaled that's more in line with how we want this to work quantitatively. Again, if you're doing qualitative risk analysis, going back to the defaults, probably it won't be any different. However, if you're doing quantitative, I highly suggest that we set up the risk matrix to fall in line with how how you're quantitatively analyzing your schedule. Otherwise, you will have very high risk. So if you have a risk that has a 10% chance of, let's say, getting a high significant portion of your budget, could affect your budget. And if it's like 5% or 10%, that's a lot. That could be a lot of money. If we don't adjust this matrix, it will end up being way down here, because 100% of the budget, it would have to be way up here to get that. So we need to scale this, need to scale it in concert with how you're actually assessing the risks. So we'll set that, but we'll just set that back to defaults for now. Once we've got all the properties in, we can add risks. So this is just a sample one that's using, but it may be that we really don't want to, we don't need to see that. We know that it's open just because it has a score on it. So we can hide. So one of the things is we can hide the columns, or we may be that we want to modify it. So one of the things, each one of these columns actually represents one of the properties in our risk register. So if we want to add, let's see if we have an owner on this one. No, we don't, but we do have owners on some of them. Good old John Newman. If we want to know who the risk owner is, we can set that in here. And you can see right here, that it is, it's hard-coded because it's being entered in as the properties right here. If we wanted to see and we wanted to see the description, I just managed to get the risk ID there. There we go. And you saw right there that if we wanted to, right here, we could enter in which is really a fairly common one that we'll have. And we have these risks in the system. So these ones have been generated automatically by the system. So we can start to build this out if we don't want to see where it's assigned to, because you don't really need to see that. If you want to see it here, we can see how that risk is assigned. And there's also other views that will show that. But we can quickly, again, we can hide that. And so we can build that up, and then that becomes can become an ad hoc report. Now, if we can go back in here to the into the risk information, and this again is where we can look at the risk register. And you can see here, these are all some of the data. We've got this risk planning. We won't go through this today. Our custom properties where we can add properties. But here's the risk review that we talked about. Now the risk review is a record, and we can add this to the risk register, to the risk over time, so we can see what's happened to that risk and track it. So I just added one today. This is a sample file that we had, and I added one earlier today. But that allows them, we can actually go in if we want to we can update this review. This is an RTF. dialogue. So if we have data that we have, content that we have in a Word document, we can paste it into here. In our enterprise version, we actually have the ability in here to save documents. But so we can bring all of that data in. We can update them, we can delete them, we can take a look at them, and we can enter them in right here again. So if I wanted to add additional data, I can bring in here. We can time them. So when are they occurring? How often do they occur? We've got it as a monthly. It tells us when the next one is scheduled. And the other side of that is that we then get a risk history. And hopefully it's going to coincide with the and we can we've just got some of it on a sandbox, so we can modify that if we have to. And so the history gives us, again, as we go through the risk life cycle, we'll be able to see changes, when they happened, when they occurred, and hopefully they're going to coincide with the status updates. That there will be some record. That history says basically who did it, who is the user, and the description. So basically, the user is your manager. That goes to your manager or their risk manager. Description, it tells us what happened, what occurred, what parts of the risk were updated. And you can see before mitigation, probability, and impact. So if we had pre and post mitigation, we've changed some of the risks due to risk burn down activities being completed successfully or not. It would also show that. So it gives us a little description of the data behind there. And so again, obviously the risk status, risk reviews, and the risk history taken together become part of your risk history, overall risk history, and a very useful aspect of your lessons learned. So you want to be able, not only do you want to be able to manage your project successfully, but you also want to be able to go back and take a look, and next time you have a project, you have the same risk, you want to see what happened to that risk, what did you do, and did it work? Okay, so that gives us, and the more often we do that, the more robust and the better our risk management capabilities are going to be over time. So the last thing I'd like to quickly discuss is, and we're right on time, is like we've got all this data, how do we get it out of the system on reports? Now I did talk a little bit about the reports that we have in the risk register. One of the main report that we have, the hard-coded report, is the risk report. The risk report is a report that is not at a risk register level. It's a risk for each risk in the system. You can generate a report. So if you look at this right here, we have this one selected right here. And you can see that there's a mechanical problem with the instrument. All of the data that we've got captured in that for that risk can be, and that can be everything pre and post mitigation, and including the mitigation waterfall chart. So all of that can be pulled out of the system. We customize it down here. Now, and it looks like a fairly busy screen, but what this does is allows us to say which properties are we going to include. So we have all these properties in the system, and hopefully we only have as many as we require. If we don't want them in the report, we can clear that. If we want this to, we want this, we've got it called description here, but we'd like it to be, the label to be different in the report. We can modify that here. And we can add some bolding to those if we would like that. Again, we can include some header and footer information. Along that, we can draw if you have a logo, and obviously out of the box, we have our own logo in here that's pulling from a samples. But you can browse and add logos as you want. If you don't want them to have them on on your report, you can clear them off of that, and maybe just have them on the we've got it there. We'll put it on the. It'll refresh when we go up there. And here's what do we want on there. So we have 3 lines each. That's going to be pulled out of the project, of the metadata around the project. So we can't actually modify that. The order of the data tables. Again, these are what are the data that we want in the system. Now, if we don't want to include something, let's say we don't want to have the cost of risk in there, or maybe the pre and post mitigation, custom properties, we can remove that, and we can reorder these. Simply by moving those up. So we can change and customize the risk register depending on how we want. Again, there's these tables. They're basically clumps, if you want to, sections of data that we have that pertain to different aspects of the risk, and we can include them or exclude them or reorder them depending on how we want to. And that way we can customize that. And that made quite a bit of difference to that one. So we've changed it quite a bit. And once we've done that, we can just quickly select the ones that we want to. If we want to report on all of the risks, or we only want to report, let's say, on ones that meet a certain criteria in terms of score, let's say anything over 10% score, we can then take a look and just do, and here's the print. Page setup allows us to set up the page. This is pulling out from my printer, and it only prints, the one that I have hooked up to this computer only prints out 8 by 11, 8.5 by 11. But if you have a plotter or you have something that has different sizes, you'll be able to pick that out and set that printing up. Then you can also go in and take a look at your print preview. And this is showing what's the printout's going to be like. And then simply you can just print that out and create a hard copy. You could print it out as a PDF if you have that print driver on your system. The other pieces that we have pulled out is the risk matrix. The risk matrix, if we can see in here, as part of the report, when we're looking at the assessment, this is the pre and post mitigation. So we have it set from going from here to here based on our mitigation efforts. This can be pulled out. Obviously, we have a pre and post mitigation cubes in the report, but we can also pull, if we want to add this to a PowerPoint presentation, we can copy these as various file types, or we can save it as a different PNG or JPEG. And that can be pulled out and added to, obviously, to your a risk report. On the risk register, we have what's called statistics. It's now going to be called our dashboard in the new version. And this tool gives us an overall view of what's happening at the risk register. When were the latest risks put in, latest updates, what were they, and who is responsible for that. It says really a high level of how many risks, how many are open, how many are risks issues and lessons learned. Obviously, issues are risks that have occurred and they've got 100% impact occurring. And threats, opportunities are both. So these are all threats. We haven't added opportunities there. If we have costs and mitigation efforts around that, haven't modeled in this one out of the sample. It would show us what the potential loss is, expected loss, probabilistic loss, if you want to say it, at the risk register level for all the risks, the cost of the mitigation for all of them. Again, it will capture all of that. So it's a really good high-level view of that. The other piece that we do have on the reports and this one is hidden, but I really like it. And this is the risk report. And what this does is gives a grid-style report of all of the risks in the system. We can customize that a bit if we want. I'm going to remove that. Really where I see this has been quite powerful is when you're giving a presentation about the risks or you're discussing it with your team, you're actually able to go have a piece of paper that's readily available, and it gives you especially on the quantitative side, gives you a quick overview of all the risks in your system and how they've been assigned to your activities. And this then gives you a chance to discuss that, maybe to defend, or it could be that you're going to modify these, but it lets us know what where this risk is. So we have the risk, and we see the task that it's assigned to, and we see the probability, which is chance in the system, the outcome, and the impact. Outcome, we call it outcome type and impact. And if you're going to, again, a very useful report to have in your hands when you go and you need to discuss this with your team about how you've modeled the risk. Here's the results you've got, and this is probably why it is. And it might be, there may be some discussion about why the prioritization of the risks might have been different than what people thought they would be, what would be your most critical risks. Here you have a nice quick output that you can provide and say, well, this is why. Now, is it correct or incorrect? We don't, or do we need to modify it? But again, really nice view that allows you to have that information in your hands and be able to distribute it to your team for discussion. And when we talked, just one of the things that just dropped into my mind is one of the things that the system does in the risk register. It's always prioritizing. We constantly, unless we actually turn this off. So right here, you can see this. What the system does, it automatically will prioritize based on score. So if you want to know which are your most critical risks, it will provide. It's basically 1, 2, and 3. If you want to know which ones are the most important based on different categories, well, let's go to cost. We can see that we can prioritize that. We can sort of slice and dice it based on cost or duration or different categories that we have in the system. That was cost. Let's say finish time. Again, we still get the same risk at the top, but that allows us, again, gives us the ability when we're reporting, that it's automatically prioritizing. It's sort of I'm going to say a built-in feature of the system that it automatically will identify which of your risks are most critical to your project. So with that, I think we're finished the presentation. If you have any questions, now would be the time to ask them. If not, I hope you enjoyed I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Feel free to contact me later. This is just showing a couple of the books that we've had published. Again, additional resources. We have lots of white papers and articles on our site. We have online tutorials. We've added some more, since this was brought up, we have some more videos. The tutorials are being updated as we speak to coincide with the new release. And if you need to contact me, my details are here, mtrumper@intaver.com, or you can contact me at the phone number below, 403-692-2252. I'd love to hear from you. As we don't have any questions, I'd like to thank everyone who attended, and I hope you enjoy your week and look forward to having you attend one of our future webinars. Oh. Okay.